It's June 2023 and I've headed to the end of the London Underground in Zone 9 of the Buckinghamshire town of Amersham, the ultimate Metroland town. Amersham is, in reality, two separate towns. Old Amersham sits on the floor of the River Missenden and is the much older of the two. Amersham on the Hill, on the other hand, sits around a mile away from Old Amersham and grew in size from the early 20th century onwards after the arrival of the Metropolitan and Great Central Railways in 1892. The first records of Amersham date back to before Anglo-Saxon times when it was known as Agmoddersham. By the time the Domesday Book was written in 1086, it had evolved to Elmoddersham. The manor of Amersham had been owned by Queen Edith, wife of Edward the Confessor and sister of King Harold, the last Anglo-Saxon king, who died at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Shortly after the former Queen's death in 1075, the lands passed to William the Conqueror as the new King of England, who then granted them to Geoffrey de Mandeville. In 1200, the town obtained a charter for a weekly market and an annual fair. The 13th century also saw the construction of St Mary's Church on the site of an earlier place of worship that dated to around 1140. The church was expanded and extended in the 14th and 15th centuries, but the current building is basically the same as it was when it was constructed 800 years ago. The parish has connections to the persecution of the Lollards, a proto-Protestant movement active in the early 16th century. A group of local followers, now known as the Amersham Martyrs, were burned at the stake on the hill overlooking the town in 1521, just a few years before Henry VIII split from Rome and adopted Protestantism as the religion of England. Around this time, the Drake family, who were lords of the manor, became patrons of the parish. That's the same Drake family that brought you Sir Francis Drake, a man who, quite rightly as it turned out, took his bowls games more seriously than the Spanish Navy. Several descendants of the Drakes have been rectors of the parish, and there are a number of memorials to the family inside the church. The Reverend Edward Drake commissioned a major restoration of the building in 1890, which created the current external appearance of the church. Located in the graveyard of the church is the reburial site of Ruth Ellis, the last woman to be executed in Britain. Next door to the churchyard are the town's Gardens of Remembrance, which have a number of memorials and statues to the town's sons and daughters who gave their lives in various conflicts. Old Amersham sits on an ancient route that dates back to prehistory, running along the Missenden Valley. In medieval times, it was simply referred to as the King's Highway. Until 1987, when the bypass opened, it was more prosaically known as the A413. After the granting of its charter in 1200, the town held weekly markets. For centuries, these were just a series of stalls by the road until a market hall was constructed in the early 17th century, though this rapidly became dilapidated, and the local Member of Parliament, Sir William Drake, that family again, decided to construct a more substantial building, the current market hall, that opened in 1682. The hall has an arcade on the ground floor, allowing markets to take place undercover, and an assembly room on the first floor. The coat of arms on the front is, naturally, that of the Drake family. A short distance away is the 18th century King's Chapel, a former church that's been converted into an events venue. On the opposite side of the High Street, partially located in a 15th century half-timbered house, is the Amersham Museum. The museum tells the history of Amersham, from prehistory through its industrial expansion, being a major player in the cosmetics industry for a number of years in the middle part of the 20th century as the home of Goya perfumes and toiletries, the coming of the railways and its conversion into a suburban dormitory town of London. There's a recreation of Amersham Station from the 1950s when steam trains still ruled the roost even on the Metropolitan line, as well as a garden where you can take in the views back to the Tudor building. 4 miles to the southeast of Amersham, on the edge of the small village of Chalfont St Giles, is the Chiltern Open Air Museum, an ethnographic museum that brings together a series of buildings and structures from across the Chiltern counties of Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Hertfordshire and Oxfordshire. Originally founded in 1976 and first opened to the public in 1981, the museum rescues and restores common buildings from Chilterns that otherwise might have been destroyed, keeping a record of everyday life in the region, from barns and farm buildings to structures built for the war effort in both World Wars and post-war prefabricated buildings. Two Nissen huts, one from World War I and a second from World War II, have been reconstructed alongside a dig for victory allotment. Close by is one of the last surviving examples of a post-World War II prefabricated corrugated asbestos cement house, the added ingredient in the cement being part of the reason why very few are left. The inside has been reconstructed to look exactly how it would have done in the 1950s, complete with flying ducks on the wall and period sanitary ware. The paint scheme is also very 1950s. One of the rebuilt barns has been converted into a cafe set on a village green that many of the residential buildings of the collection are housed off of. In 2014, the museum completed reconstruction of Wishart-style farmhouse in Haddenham that had been held in storage for 30 years. Inside, the rooms have been decorated from various decades of its use, from Victorian farmer's bedroom, the Edwardian era, to that of a 1970s children's bedroom, complete with garish wallpaper. It's not just residential houses that are on display in the museum. Along with barns and even a wellhead, there's also industrial buildings, with a working smithy being one of the key attractions. An on-site blacksmith creates ironworks live.
Good morning.
Morning.
Going even further back in time, there's also a reconstruction of an Iron Age Roundhouse. At the bottom end of the site is a reconstructed chair factory for High Wycombe, highlighting one of the major industries that existed in the Chilterns for centuries. The final part of the site looks at the larger farm buildings with a reconstructed farmyard, complete with barns, grain store, dairy and stables. One stop up the line from Amersham is the small village of Great Missenden. In 1874, Robert Louis Stevenson spent the night at the Red Lion. Whilst working on his first novel, David John Moore Cornwall, better known as John le Carré, commuted into Metroland from the town. But its most famous resident, and the one who's had a lasting legacy on the town, was author Roald Dahl, who lived in the village from 1954 until his death in 1990, with the village being inspiration for several characters and locations. The BFG appearing on the wall of the museum at the exact point he would have been visible from the orphanage Sophie lived in. The museum tells the history of Dahl's life, from his birth through his experience in the war to his writings. His writing hut that sat at the bottom of his garden and from where he produced many of his works has been relocated inside the museum, including all the contents, right down to the knickknacks on the table. In places, the museum also addresses some of the more modern concerns about some of the language that Dahl used, both in his books and in life. A short walk away from the museum is the 14th century church of St Peter and St Paul, occupying the high ground overlooking the village centre. In the graveyard of the church is Dahl's final resting place. Amersham sits at the end of the Metropolitan line of the London Underground with a half-hourly service to Aldgate via Harrow-on-the-Hill, Baker Street, King's Cross and Liverpool Street. Journey times to Aldgate are just over an hour. The station also has half-hourly Chiltern Railway services to London Metroland, taking 55 minutes. From Harrow-on-the-Hill, Superloop service SL9 runs every 12 to 15 minutes to Heathrow Airport, taking about 55 minutes to make the journey.